One look at me will probably have most of you thinking, man, that guy can't even walk down the sidewalk without women throwing their sodden panties all over his face. That kind of intense attraction can only be fostered under extreme conditions. I trained underneath a waterfall. I ran up steps in a sweatshirt. I sucked dick behind the KFC for a double down. And most importantly, I grew up with a Sega Genesis. Sega Genesis has its fair share of incredibly difficult games. Just a thing for a young mongoloid such as myself to hone my mastery of mashing buttons as hard as my grandma mashes bananas into her ghastly butthole. Due to my father's long work hours when I was a baby, I actually thought the Sega Genesis in the living room was my father. My mom would even turn it on and let it warm up for a few minutes so I could sleep on it at night. One time I pulled the power cord out and popped it in my mouth. The resulting electric shock caused my head to explode. I had to go around without a head for a few years, until my adult head started to grow in. If you wish to be drowning in women's soaking wet undergarments like I am on a daily basis, the best training is finger blasting your way through some tough-ass video games. So hit that subscribe button if you would still eat your grandma's mashed asshole bananas. These are the top 10 most difficult Sega Genesis games. Chakan, the Forever Man is a side-scrolling action game developed by Extended Play, releasing in 1992. It's also based on a comic book of the same name. Player takes control of the titular Chakan, who looks like my grandpa's nutsack after we plucked all the pubes off to make wishes. Chakan boasts that even death itself can't kill him. Death, upon hearing this, challenges Chakan to a fight. Chakan claps them cheeks until they're crimson red, emerging victorious. Death, being a petty bitch, curses Chakan to eternal life until all supernatural forces of evil are as submissive and breedable as death is. So Chakan sets out to conquer 4 different elemental-themed worlds, each with its own 3 sub-levels and boss. Each level has a dedicated countdown timer, and when the time runs out, you have to restart from the first area, regardless of how much progress you made. This game is riddled with ridiculous platforming that seems designed specifically to frustrate the player. The slightest mistake when jumping along what seem to be pretty basic platforms leads to severe punishment. There are endlessly respawning enemies that can attack you from all directions simultaneously, so even though Chakan is supposed to be this badass with 2 cool swords and can spin jump and stuff, playing as him could sometimes feel like playing as an abandoned baby. You have unlimited lives and continues, which sounds generous, but you're still under time pressure when entering any level, and considering how much of a frustrating slog getting around the levels can be with the endless enemies and clunky platforming, dying too much will result in you running out of time, having to restart at the beginning. This is what eternal life feels like. No wonder Chakan wants to die. I give this game 1 finger blasting your own ass out of 10. This one is an absolute controller destroyer. Contra Hardcore is a side-scrolling run-and-gun shooter developed by Konami, releasing in 1994. If you played a Contra game in the past, you have a good idea of what to expect here. Success is dependent on an incredible amount of pattern memorization and fast reflexes. You'll die and die and die again, reaching up to the heavens, wishing for a big titty nun to deliver you from suffering. But no help is coming for you. You'll have to come on yourself. The story sees a group of hardcore gamers come together to slap the pee-pee of a big bad guy named Colonel Thundercock. Player has a choice of 4 playable characters in this game, up from the usual 2 of earlier Contra games. Each character has their own set of weapons as well as visual characteristics. As is tradition, you'll die in 1 hit. Any tiny little shred of damage causes your badass gun-toting superhuman to just fall over, ass sticking right up in the air, ready to receive punishment. Not to say the difficulty takes away from the quality of the game. Contra Hardcore has some awesome set-piece moments like hover bike and plane levels, and crazy boss fights with huge detailed sprites. It's also a pretty early example of a game with multiple endings, making the player choose different paths as you progress through the game. Your choice affecting what ending you see, if you ever actually manage to beat the game. Contra Hardcore reinforces the series' reputation of really fun, really fucking hard video games. I give this game 1 pizza burn on the roof of your mouth out of 10. The Adventures of Batman and Robin is a side-scrolling action game featuring Batman and his partner Dick, following their codependent homosexual relationship. Mr. Freeze brings 3 other famous Batman villains from Arkham Asylum, including the Joker, Two-Face, and Mad Hatter, in order to distract Batman and Dick while he builds his big-ass freeze ray thing. Batman and Dick must navigate 4 levels, 1 dedicated to each major villain, in order to stop Mr. Freeze from busting all over Gotham's face. The game manages to capture the look of the show quite well, and the in-game sprites look and animate really well. This is a side-scrolling run-and-gun game. The player can attack enemies from afar with batarang projectiles and use melee attacks with the same button when enemies come within striking distance. Batman is constantly assailed by extra-large black thunders from all directions, just like the real-life Batman. Enemies are constantly pouring onto the screen, and taking too much damage early in a stage can make surviving later on almost impossible. You need to play consistently well throughout the entire game because just a few mistakes will see Batman and his dick exhausted and unsatisfied. The entire game features 2-player co-op if you have your own dick that you'd like to play with, but this can make the game even harder since you both share continues. If one player is lacking, you'll run into continues even faster. If you can handle the difficulty, and I know you can, you'll be in for one of the best looking and most technically impressive games on the Sega Genesis. I give this game 1 splinter stuck up underneath your fingernail out of 10. The Immortal is an isometric action-adventure game that originally released for the Apple II GS, and later ported to the Sega Genesis in 1992. He plays a filthy old fuck named Carl Cumdumpster, who intercepts a message from Mortimer Mudbutt, his mentor, and goes on a quest to traverse an 8-level labyrinth in order to rescue him. Exploration takes place from isometric perspective, as you navigate the labyrinth looking for goodies and fighting enemies. There are many death traps riddled throughout the environment, and a single step outside of the intended path leads to immediate death. A single wrong step will see you swallowed by the urethra of a fat cock, shot in the face with an arrow, ass blasted by a giant spider leg, and dozens of other trial and error ass ways to die. Combat kinda feels like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out for lack of a better comparison, but you kinda feel like one of those homeless guys from bum fights. The player must dodge, swing a sword, and stab enemies during battle, choosing which action to take depending on what the enemy is doing. Reacting with the wrong choice leads to taking damage and eventually foiling. A great deal of the difficulty in the Immortal comes from the trial and error nature of its exploration. There's no way to anticipate some of the stupid deaths coming your way until they happen. The game can very slowly be overcome with rote memorization of the levels and mastery of the shitty combat. That's not to say the game is without its merits. The visuals for the time are unique and striking, and it definitely nails a good atmosphere and theme, but the trial and error nature of its difficulty makes me rate this game 1 nutsack stapled to the inside of your thigh out of 10. Subterranea is best described as a multi-directional shooter, releasing for the Sega Genesis in 1994. The game takes place in a mining facility on an off-world asteroid, where aliens have taken over the facility and are now grooming the human crew through Discord. Players tasked with saving the humans trapped in the facility and defeating the filthy aliens before they can meet with the survivors IRL. You take control of an experimental flying craft that is, for some reason, the best humanity could come up with for this situation. Much of the game's difficulty comes from controlling your vessel. The D-pad doesn't cause the ship to move directly. Instead, the left and right arrows rotate the ship, and a button press activates the ship's thrusters. The result is your ship burning the pathetically small amount of fuel on board to hurl itself into mountains and explode. The ship is constantly under the influence of gravity and inertia, which is the first and most prominent major hurdle for most players. You can spend several hours just getting used to basic navigation, and even then just moving your ship around is a major challenge. Landing on any sort of angle other than perfectly upright or touching any uneven surface in the environment causes your ship to take damage. It's like playing Operation, except if you win, the patient actually gets up off the game board and flicks the head of your cock. Basic navigation of static environments is hard enough, but having to do battle against the enemy's stupid bosses is nearly impossible. They move way faster and are far more aggressive than anything you face in the regular levels. Combined with the way the game handles its short-range regular weapons, running out of fuel, and your ship constantly sailing off into its own doom, Subterranea is one of the hardest Genesis games ever made. I give this game 1 licking a car battery out of 10. Alien Soldier is a side-scrolling run-and-gun action game that came out in 1995. It was developed by Treasure, who had already earned their spot as action game royalty with Gunstar Heroes and Dynamite Headdy. You play as a disease-ridden birdman named Epsilon Eagle. You can tell this game is a work of fiction because birds aren't real. Each level typically opens with a short side-scrolling section where you obliterate most of the enemies on screen with Epsilon Eagle's awesome moveset. You can run and double jump as well as dash across the screen. That, when at full health, becomes a much more powerful dash that can run a train right through several enemies at once. You also have a timed parry move that, when performed correctly, converts enemies' attacks into health for the player. The first few seconds are deceptively easy. The real challenge comes from the boss fights, which are the game's main attraction. There are 25 stages, 26 bosses in total, and the major bulk of the gameplay is boss fights. Getting familiar with Epsilon's moveset and movement is crucial to survival, and some of the bosses are devious in their difficulty. Boss design is top notch here, bosses featuring massive detailed sprites with cool abstract visuals. You'll have to focus and play really consistently to clear all the stages. Getting good at a boss rush game like this requires a lot of repetition and memorizing boss animations. But it's a good kind of difficulty. Overcoming a difficult boss fight feels satisfying, and the game gives a great sense of feeling like one lone guy against a massive force. I give this game one bird charging its battery on a power line out of 10. Comix Zone is a beat-em-up developed by Sega Technical Institute, releasing in 1995. The game has a really unique look, especially for the time. It's a very early example of a video game portraying the look and color palette of a comic book. You play as Sketch, the Spooge Gobbler Turner, a freelance comic book artist. One day, while working on his soon-to-be failure of a book, lightning strikes a panel of his draft, bringing to life the villain of Sketch's story, Mortis Muff Muncher. He sends Sketch into the pages of his own comic book, where he can keep him imprisoned as his own personal cumsock. Sketch can punch, kick, block, and attack while in midair. Much of the challenge comes from the lack of healing items. You can pick up iced tea to restore some health, but they're pretty sparse, and they take up an item slot, of which you only have 3. Destroying parts of the environment, such as barrels and boxes, also drain some of your health, and there are parts of the levels that require you to destroy them to progress. If you don't plan ahead by saving a bomb to blow them up, you have to sacrifice some of your health just to continue playing. Furthermore, you only have a single life and no checkpoints. When you die, you have to restart the entire level. There are some cheap moments where you lose life for stupid reasons, such as burning barrels in the panel below you that deal some damage when you land on them. But the game doesn't indicate any danger at all until you've already taken damage. The game's visual style and awesome soundtrack are usually enough for most to overlook the difficulty, at least for a few minutes of enjoyment. But the lack of checkpoints is really frustrating, especially considering the game is quite repetitive, making replaying the same level over and over again a slog. I give Comix Zone one paper cut in the webbing between your fingers out of 10. Gaia Res is a horizontally scrolling shooter that released in 1990. As is tradition for the genre, the game is as hard as my award-winning 17-pound calcified chunk of horse poop. It used to be even heavier, but I got hungry while I was taking it home. Gaia Res takes place in the year 3000, and Earth is uninhabitable due to heavy pollution. This attracts the attention of a group of space banditos called Gulfer, who plan to use the toxic sludge to create weapons of mass destruction. An ace pilot named Dan Dickpounder is chosen to pilot an experimental aircraft intended to defend Earth from the sexy aliens. Your vessel is capable of sucking up the weapons of your foes, and grabbing multiple of the same weapon increases its power. There are 18 weapons in the game total, giving you lots of variety and firepowers as you fucking die. The shmup genre is well known for its difficulty, and Gaia Res is no exception. The screen is filled with hordes of enemies all flying at you, and enemies constantly bombard you with firepower. It's like getting never-ending dildos thrown at your face.
Let's take something away from every meeting we have.
Going into certain situations with an unsuitable weapon can also make the game harder than I get when I see a half-eaten pizza in the neighbor's garbage can. The difficulty doesn't detract from the game's quality, however. The visuals are great, especially considering it's a fairly early title on the platform, and all the great shmup things are here, such as giant bosses, lots of weapons, and a great soundtrack. I give Gaia Res one realizing 20 years later she was flirting with me the whole time out of 10. Earthworm Jim 2 is a run-and-gun platformer released in late 1995. Princess What's-Her-Name has been kidnapped once again, and it's up to Jimothy the Earthworm to save her. It's difficult to tell, considering the game's sense of humor, whether or not the developers deliberately made some of these levels specifically to piss players off. There's the notorious puppy love level, where you have to bounce puppies being thrown from a window by the game's main villain on a fluffy marshmallow. You need to get them all the way to the opposite side of the screen. All the while, more and more puppies get added to the chaos. The hitbox of the marshmallow is deceptive, and the level of precision and speed required to not drop any cute, innocent puppies is crazy. There are several examples of zany and creative levels like this, and if it weren't for the game's sense of humor and style, they would be much less tolerable. There's a section where you turn into a blind salamander, a quiz show that's essentially trial and error until you brute force your way through with rote memorization, and a section where you must reverse slide up a handrail while avoiding falling gilfs from space. Top of all that, there's no save feature. It's a blessing from the gods that the game is genuinely fun to play through multiple times, since most players are probably going to be seeing the first few levels quite often before they manage to beat the game. I give Earthworm Jim 2 one lick of a sweaty armpit out of 10. Ghouls and Ghosts for the Sega Genesis is a port of the arcade game developed by Capcom, and is a sequel to Ghosts and Goblins. Regardless of what platform the series appears on, they are always intensely difficult. I've heard people claim they managed to play through both loops in like an hour, their first time ever playing the game. I like to tell these people to lick the cream from between my ass cheeks. The player once again takes control of Sir Arthur, who upon seeing the incestuous ghouls and ghosts have returned to ass ram the princess's kingdom, sets off once again to save everybody. This is a side-scrolling action game and only takes a few seconds to show the player what kind of toe-sucking experience they're in store for. The ghouls and ghosts are coming, and they're coming hard.
This is cum!
Enemies respawn endlessly, and I'm not being hyperbolic. For as long as you stand there, enemies will continue to attack you in hordes until you die. The only way to succeed is to continue moving forward. Stopping for just a second to pick something up or kill a straggling enemy will see you get overwhelmed. Just as in the first game, you need to clear all this horseshit twice in order to fully complete the game. Saving grace of this title is that it's really fun. It's a chaotic time. The game has a good sense of humor as well, with how Sir Arthur animates and ends up in his boxers when taking damage while wearing armor. There's also a great cast of bosses to fight with some awesome sprite work. Ghouls and Ghosts is one of those legendarily hard games, but it's still definitely worth playing even today because of how fun it is, difficulty and all. There's my objectively correct list of hardest Sega Genesis games ever. If you liked it, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments how your grandma's mashed asshole bananas tasted. I'll see you all in the next video.